Hello and welcome to Insight Indonesia, brought to you by the Jakarta Globe. I'm your host, Lynn Newman. Today, it actually is true. We have a guest who truly needs no introduction, especially in Indonesia and Southeast Asia. My guest is Nobel Peace Prize laureate and former president of Timor-Leste, Jose Ramos Horta. What a pleasure it is to have you here.
Pleasure. How are you?
Very well. You were in town for an event on Tuesday on Peace and Reconciliation in Southeast Asia that was sponsored by the Strategic Review. Tell us about peace and reconciliation in Timor-Leste. What's the state of play?
Well, the events of '99 were preceded by 24 years of occupation. And so when we achieved freedom following the referendum in '99, we had to address reconciliation at two fronts. One front, domestic, national, because there were many thousands of East Timorese who had sided with the occupation. Some committed barbarities over the years, particularly in '99. But also we had to reconcile with our most important neighbor, Indonesia, while at the same time tackling the issues of national reconstruction, nation building, state building, trying to put in place a public administration, a judiciary, a parliamentary system, resurrect the economy, to create jobs. So we had to tackle all these challenges at once. You couldn't say what was priority number one. Everything was priority number one. What I have to say is that we have been enormously successful in national reconciliation between those favoring independence, vast majority, those favoring staying on with Indonesia, and tremendous success in the reconciliation with Indonesia.
I think this just to cut in for a moment, this is one of the things that the outside world, people who don't know your country and don't know Indonesia, find very difficult sometimes to understand. People will say, well, why didn't East Timor insist on bringing Wiranto to a tribunal, for example, or pushing the issue? And you chose reconciliation over revenge, in a sense. Would that be accurate?
Yes, we had two choices then. One was to heed the emotions, to go with emotions, to go with some vocal pressure from the international community, some hypocritical, because those who were calling for international justice were the ones who, until '99, were supporting the Suharto regime. As the Suharto regime ended, Indonesia struggled to build a democracy. Instead of understanding the efforts of the new Indonesia, new leaders in Indonesia, they wanted to push us to have an international tribunal. We could have gone along with them. No, we decided not to. We decided that there are state interests, pragmatic considerations. Indonesia will be there forever, our most important neighbor. We need Indonesia's friendship, understanding for stability on our borders, for Timor-Leste to integrate in the region. But also it was not only the dictates of pragmatism, because that can be cynical. You do something because you know you have no choice. No, it was not only that. We also were sympathetic to the post-Suharto Indonesia.
Well, in a very real way, obviously, Timor-Leste would not have gained its independence at the time it did had Indonesia not begun the reformasi process with the ouster of Suharto.
Exactly. I have said so many times over the years to our people, to everyone in my country, We freed ourselves in 99 because the Indonesians freed themselves. We didn't defeat Indonesia militarily. Our freedom happened partly because of the events in Indonesia itself, when tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands came to the streets in Jakarta and around the country, putting an end to the 30-year dictatorship in Indonesia, which then paved the way for a dialogue with us, with the United Nations, with Portugal, leading to a referendum. And when the referendum turned out in favor of independence, even though Indonesia was in turmoil in 98, in 99, when the president, and it was a weak president, B.J. Habibie, was not like a strong man, and ordered the military to order the result of the referendum and leave the country, they left. That was remarkable.
They left in a somewhat sloppy way, but they did leave.
Yeah, but the destruction, the killings was not done only by the Indonesian side. It was done by East Timorese elements also, the so-called militias, you know. So, of course, Indonesia was responsible because it was in charge of security under the New York Agreement, but it was understandable. Indonesia was in a turmoil, changes here, dramatic. You know, the end of a regime after 30 years. And the army was, you know, unmotivated, you know, because many of its men died in East Timor.
It was a very emotional time in Indonesia, and I can remember speaking to veterans of the Indonesian armed forces who fought in East Timor, and were very bitter at the time.
Yes, exactly.
But everybody took a deep breath and stepped back.
Exactly. You know, when you send an army to fight under the pretext of the propaganda at the time of the state, and then many years later, many days later, you tell them, okay, now you leave. Well, so the fact that they left, well, because if Indonesia at that time in 99 had said, no, we are not leaving, in spite of the referendum, it would not be the United States, Australia that was going to go to East Timor against the Indonesian armed forces.
I'm going to take a break there because we've got sponsors to keep happy. When we come back, we'll talk more with President Horta. You're watching Insight Indonesia, brought to you by the Jakarta Globe. Stay with us. Welcome back to Inside Indonesia, brought to you by the Jakarta Globe. Today we're talking with President Jose Ramos Horta, the former president of Timor-Leste, former president and prime minister and defense minister and foreign minister. You've had every job.
Yes, that's true.
East Timor-Leste, forgive me, has just gone through a round of presidential and parliamentary elections. How would you assess the electoral process, despite, I know there was some unrest on Sunday, but we can talk about that, but how would you assess the electoral process this time around?
I would say remarkable, both at the technical administrative level, executed by our state agency for administration of elections, supervised by our National Election Commission, of course, with a very positive, active assistance from the United Nations system, particularly UNDP, with the United Nations Police, but primarily the law and order was from our own national police. There was not a single incident, complaint lodged against the behavior of political leaders, political parties, not a single complaint leveled against the behavior of the national police. So it was remarkably free, smooth.
You're coming to a situation in East Timor now where CNRT is very strong, Shanana's party. Fretilin is not in the ruling coalition. This announcement caused some unrest in Dili on Sunday. What was that unrest all about? Because viewed from afar, it's hard to understand. We read something in the newspaper. What caused the unrest in Delhi this week?
Well, first, let me clarify to put things in perspective, the right dimension of the problems. It was essentially a problem of law and order. Few hundred youth elements who were upset by some of the language, abusive, insensitive language they heard broadcast live over television from a CNRT, Shanana Party's meeting. That's what caused the anger among the youth. Time and again, over the years, in recent past, I always tell people, watch your language. We must be careful when we address publicly, whether through media or public gatherings, because whatever we say, and that is in a confrontational style, can be an instigation to violence in the streets. This is what happened. It is not because Fredling was not invited to join the coalition. Purely a reaction to the abusive language, insensitive language used by some.
Because, of course, as soon as that headline appeared, people were thinking about 2006, the assassination attempt on you, worries that the bad days were coming back.
No, that's nonsense. Nothing of that sort. I was home, relaxing, I was watching movies, news, international news elsewhere. I knew the situation was...
Well, and of course you felt secure enough to come to Jakarta.
Yes, and when I left home and the next day to go to the airport, I went through the city center where parts had been site of the trouble. There was not a single incident. I didn't see even a single police officer along the road. I saw thousands and thousands of children, youth going back and forth to schools. So the situation was normal. There has been continuing some sporadic incidents last night, here and there, but minor. Messages I have received from relatives, from friends, official sources, they say it's been totally under control. And of course, this does not mean that the underlying tensions are over. It is required that those who won the election, in particular the president, who in the meantime left the country overseas for meetings, and the prime minister have to manage the situation with absolute prudence and wisdom, to continue the healing process that I started in 2007, to continue the peacemaking efforts to further stabilize the country so that we can have a real economic takeoff this year or next year.
Now, you yourself did not stand for parliament.
No.
You have no political office now. Have you retired from politics?
Well, one reason I came to Jakarta is to look for a job at the Jakarta Globe. So if you pay very well,
We'll certainly.
might consider.
Please leave your CV with us. And we'll
No, I'm still, not in a hurry. I'm writing. I write for yesterday or today, front page in the Daily Beast, which is a blog of Newsweek.
Sure.
I had a front page article on Syria. I have written on numerous occasions for Huffington Post, the New York Times, Herald Tribune. You have invited me to write for Jakarta Globe. I will do some of that, international lectures. I'm invited for the next 3 months. I have a very heavy schedule of speaking engagements, which is important to connect Timor-Leste with the world, but also to inspire people. They believe I can give inspirational talks to thousands of people around the world. I've been doing that for years. But if the president of my country, the prime minister, once the government is formed, believe that I can be of service to the country, I'm available. You know, it's my country. I'm still sane, healthy.
You look fine.
Yeah.
And we're going to take a break there. When we come back, I want to talk some more about relations between Indonesia and East Timor with budding reporter and columnist and Nobel Peace Laureate Jose Ramos Horta. You're watching Inside Indonesia. Stay with us. Well, welcome back to Insight Indonesia, brought to you by the Jakarta Globe. I'm your host, Lynn Newman, and today our guest is Nobel Peace Laureate Jose Ramos Horta, the former president of Timor-Leste. One of the things you talked about at the Strategic Review conference was the continuing cultural influence and the continuing cultural ties between Indonesia and East Timor. I found that interesting. And tell us a little bit about that.
Well, about 40% of East Timorese population still speak Bahasa. We have thousands here in Indonesia, thousands of youth studying in universities in Indonesia. We have thousands living across the border in West Timor. Daily flights, 2 flights a day from Denpasar, Dili, Denpasar, almost always full. More than half are East Timorese, visiting families, holidays in Indonesia, studying.
You have to put up with Merpati just like we do.
Yes, and every time, you know, the Bishop of Dili, you know, every time I go to confess my sins, he knows I'm going to travel Merpati. And so you better be in good favors with God if you travel Merpati. I'm a bit being unkind to Merpati because they have performed a very valuable service, although it is also in their interest because it's the most expensive route in the archipelago, the most profitable route for Merpati. Now we have also Batavia. Batavia is a better managed airline with better planes, safer planes. We have a lot of trade with Indonesia. 70 to 80% of the commercial goods, like consumer goods, are from Indonesia. Tractors, motorbikes, bicycles, cars, and then Surabaya and all major stores in Indonesia are the transit route for the things coming from China or elsewhere to East Timor. So it has been a very profitable relationship in terms of trade between Timor-Leste and Indonesia, profitable for both. For us, we buy, but we need these goods, and they are reasonably priced. Good for Indonesia because, you know, tens of millions of dollars every year flow to Indonesia through this almost, you can say, one-way trade because we hardly export anything to Indonesia. So the relationship at every level is exceptional. Indonesian televisions are very much watched in Timor-Leste.
Cinetrons, you're watching the Cinetrons down there.
Yeah, well, Indonesian soap operas, music, rock groups like Zanrud and many others that I'm not very familiar with. And we stole a famous Indonesian singer, Christine Dayanti, married to a Timorese businessman, and maybe more to follow.
More to follow. One thing that I'm curious about is we were talking about reconciliation at the event on Tuesday. We have problems. Malaysia has reconciliation issues, racial issues. Thailand has is at a political impasse. Myanmar is trying to overcome some of their history. What can East Timor's experience, Timor-Leste's experience, offer to the region, especially assuming that you guys get into ASEAN next year?
East Timor and Indonesia can offer the region the example, our experience of how the two countries involved in a protracted conflict that caused so much harm, emotional and physical, to the two sides, because let's not forget that thousands of Indonesian soldiers lost their lives in Timor-Leste. And Indonesia suffered a traumatic experience in '99 when such a powerful country of the region had to vacate the territory. And yet the two sides, the East Timorese side, have been sensitive in never saying that we defeated them, never up the wounds. We always say we won our freedom because Indonesians regained their freedom. Otherwise, there will be no force in the world that would have come to our rescue. The US, Australia would not land in Timor-Leste against the will of the Indonesian armed forces. And that was avoided through the skills of President SBY, Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, when he was coordinating minister back then during the Gus Dur time and before, when he was a senior military officer here in Jakarta. He was the point man negotiating with Kofi Annan in New York with ASEAN countries to prepare a dignified way for Indonesia to leave the country. And when we left, President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono was also instrumental in working with Gus Dur, later with Ibu Mega, in taking steps for normalization of relations with East Timor.
We're almost out of time. I want to leave with one thought, which is I think that people should take away from this discussion the value that comes from taking a deep breath and not seeking revenge. And as a result, Indonesia and Timor-Leste, I think, will be friends for a long, long time.
Yeah, and I don't think there are two countries in the region that have a better relation than Timor-Leste and Indonesia.
Which is a remarkable thing to say after the events of 1999. Jose, I want to thank you very much for being with us. You've been watching Insight Indonesia, brought to you by the Jakarta Globe. We're available by live streaming on beritasatu.tv and beritasatu.com and online at thejakartaglobe.com. Thank you for being with us.